especially if Morena wins the 2021 election and they get the 2/3 of the lower chamber, they will basically be able to dramatically change the way electoral authorities work.
Hello, I am Enrique Quesada, and this is the Judy Lay Allen Mexico Center podcast from the Center for the United States and Mexico at Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy. On June 6, Mexican voters will go out to the polls to renew the lower chamber of the country's federal Congress. 30 states will elect a new state legislature, and 15 states will elect a new governor. Surrounding a midterm election that is seen as a referendum on President López Obrador and Morena's performance in office is the increasing conflict between the president himself and the National Electoral Institute. The upcoming election plays a major role on whether López Obrador can continue pushing forward with his vision for Mexico. To discuss what is at stake in this election beyond the number of offices, I talked to Javier Martín Reyes. In this conversation, Javier Martín Reyes provides important context to understand the current electoral landscape, the conflict between the president and the country's electoral institutions, and what this all means for the future of democracy in Mexico. Javier Martín Reyes is a professor in the Department of Legal Studies at the Centro de Investigación y Docencia Económicas in Mexico City. He writes extensively on matters of constitutional and election law for both academic and general audiences. I have a soft spot for conversations about elections. I really enjoyed this one, and I hope you find it both informative and interesting. So here's Javier Martín Reyes. Javier Martín Reyes, professor in the Department of Legal Studies at the Centro de Investigación y Docencia Económicas, known as CIDE. Thank you so much for accepting the invitation to be on the podcast.
No, thank you, Enrique. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Today we're talking about the upcoming elections in Mexico that will take place on June 6. Perhaps it's now a little bit of a joke to say that they will be the election with the largest number of offices that are up for grabs, but here we are again at this point. So the lower chamber of Congress will be renewed, 500 seats, and there is one Senate seat in dispute as well. But more importantly, perhaps, are the 15 states will elect a new governor, and 30 are electing new local legislatures, and of course many more municipal governments will be renewed as well. So with Election Day about a month away, what is at stake for the president and for the opposition beyond these numbers? What does this mean for the president's national project, right? The one that he calls the fourth transformation, and that now the term is also kind of used as a joke?
I guess, first of all, I mean, it's really a joke to say, every 3 years that we're facing the largest election in the Mexican history, but it's true, right? Through several electoral reforms, we have concentrated elections not only on a specific month in June, but also more and more local elections happen at the same time that the federal election. I guess that has an effect, which I don't know if it's good or bad, but it's a fact. And it is the fact that local elections are more and more dependent on what happens at the national level, right? So, of course, there are many races at the state level that are very interesting in terms of who's competing, whether or not Morena has chances. We have seen the emergence of several challengers from small parties like Movimiento Ciudadano, which in the beginning didn't seem to have a great chance of winning those elections, and they're performing really, really well on the poll. So there's a local dimension that it's relevant in these elections. I think this is the first chance that Morena has to win a lot of local elections in terms of governorships. If we see their numbers, of course, they control the federal Congress. They almost have 2/3 of both the lower chamber and the Senate. They also control something as 17 state legislatures, which is a lot because that allows them to do constitutional reforms. But the thing that had never happened was a year in which a lot of governors were going to be elected. And I think this time Morena can demonstrate at least that they can win half of the governorships that are being elected this year. Let me say that on the local side of the equation. I think the most important thing is definitely what's going to happen at the national level, right? First and foremost, the numbers for Morena just look great. It seems that they will definitely win again the majority in the lower chamber. So it's almost for sure that if you add up Morena, the Green Party, and the Labor Party, the PT, and the Verde, they're going to have more than half of the seats, right? So they will be able to continue to pass basically any legislation that they want. And the other thing is that they have a really, really big chance of winning 2/3 of the House. Now, if you see, I think the best way to have a picture of what's going to happen is a poll of polls made by a company called Oraculus. And basically, they give them a 50% chance of winning 2/3 of the lower chamber. In terms of López Obrador's project, I think that is clearly, this election is going to be something like a referendum, right? The president has said again and again, a lot of times, that he was not going to do a lot of constitutional reforms during the first 3 years of his period, right? That's not 100% accurate, because we have seen some constitutional reforms that are relevant. But it seems from what he has said during the campaign and also as a president, that he really wanted to have 3 years with a focus more on the administration and not so much on constitutional reforms. And my impression is that if Morena and its allies win the 2021 election in the federal Congress, what we will enter is a new phase of this so-called fourth transformation, in which the president will try to do many constitutional reforms that can dramatically change the design of the Mexican state, right? So I think there's a lot of there's a lot of stake in this election. For the opposition, it's also, I think, a great challenge, because their numbers do not seem to be good, right? Today a poll was published, and both the larger opposition parties, the PRI and the PAN, they're basically getting the same percentage of votes that they got in 2018.
Is this from El Financiero?
Right, exactly.
I saw that poll, yeah.
And
it looks bad.
It's just like that, right? So it really tells you that the Mexican political system has changed, right? 2018 was not an outlier, right? It was not only that it was the first time that López Obrador was really able to win. It was not only, the presidential candidate just taking a lot of votes and, a lot of legislators and governors benefiting from that. No, it's we really live in a different political system with one major party, which is Morena. Then we have two relatively medium-sized opposition parties, the PRI and the PAN, and then we have a lot of small parties like the PRD, Movimiento Ciudadano, the Green Party, the Labor Party, but they're competing on a completely different league. So yes, I think this is an election that it's clearly telling us that the Mexican political system is fundamentally different from what we saw after 1997, and especially the 2000 election. So it's really, really an important election, Enrique.
So now I'd like to talk about the conflict that has been heating up between President Andrés Manuel López Obrador and the National Electoral Institute. So due to a variety of irregularities when registering some of the candidacies of several aspirants from Morena, the president's party, the Electoral Institute said, nope, you cannot register these individuals because of these irregularities. They also sent a warning to the president because of his morning's press conference. That's where he has made some references to how the party's performing in the polls and some government programs. And of course, AMLO and members of his party are not happy, and they're also not quiet about this discontent. What can you tell me about this conflict? Who's in the right according to electoral law that regulates these elections, and what can we expect from the outcome of this fight?
I mean, I guess this confrontation between the president and INE, the electoral administration body of Mexico, it's really paradoxical. And I say that this is really this is a paradox because, I mean, it is true, and we can, of course, discuss whether or not they are good or bad, but we have a lot of rules in the Mexican Constitution and in the Mexican election law that are pretty tough in terms of the limits they impose on government speech, and also on the things that candidates can and cannot do in terms of campaign finance, right? But the thing is that those rules are the product of demands that López Obrador and the parties that supported him for many years fought for, right? So in the 2006 election, I mean, we can remember it was a really, really close election. Felipe Calderón won by less than 1% of the popular vote, right? And I think that López Obrador presented a legal challenge to the election court, and he made an argument that was fundamentally right? He said the Mexican president at that time, Vicente Fox, participated in the election, and he was, making not quite explicit, but everyone understood that Fox was supporting the candidate of his party, Felipe Calderón, and he was also attacking López Obrador. I think in many democracies that would be completely normal, right? Like, I mean, you wouldn't expect like an elected official that is representing a political party and that's defending a specific partisan platform, we just stay quiet during the elections, right? But Mexican law, for historical reasons, clearly establishes that neither the president nor any other authority can participate or can intervene in the elections, right? So that was a law at that time. The election court was clear when said that President Fox violated the law and the Constitution by criticizing and attacking López Obrador, but the court refused to nullify the election. So that was a major issue in 2007 and 2008 when a major electoral reform was made in Mexico. And López Obrador and the parties that supported him really fought for more strict rules, right? The same thing happened in the 2012 election. During that year, López Obrador made the claim that Enrique Peña Nieto, who eventually won the election and became president, have spent more money than it was legally allowed. Again, it's not common, or let me say, most consolidated democracies regularly do not have the maximum in terms of what can you spend on a given election. Of course, you have limits for individual contributions. Sometimes, people from other countries, or I don't know. When we say Mexico, moral persons or enterprises cannot give money, or companies cannot give money to candidates. I mean, that's sort of the regulations that you have, but it's kind of rare to have like a spending limit, right? In Mexico, we do have a spending limit. I think it's, if you see it from a comparative perspective, it's kind of low. So there's a lot of money that doesn't go into the official records. But in the end, I mean, it was the law. So López Obrador made that claim at that time, and he said, like, Peña Nieto spent a lot more, and again, the election should be nullified, right? What the court said that year is that the process to determine whether or not a candidate had spent more or less in terms of the spending limit was a really slow process, right? So at the time that the court had to, just issue its opinion regarding the election, the whole process of, revising, the spending in forms and other documents was not ready, right? So what the court said is we do not know if Peña Nieto spent more or less. Today in Mexico, any election can be nullified if any candidate spends more than 5% of the limit, right? And that's on the Constitution, right? And if you see the election law, you will also see that, for example, it clearly says that any candidate that participated in a primary election that won and that did not inform what he spent or where did he get his money cannot be registered as a candidate. So these two controversies have to do with López Obrador and his political party violating the laws that they fought for in 2006 and 2012. We can discuss a lot about these mañaneras or these press conferences. One thing that it is clear is that López Obrador does two things. First of all, he talks a lot about the achievements of his government. He's always talking about what the administration is doing. And the Constitution says that during the campaigns, all the authorities have to suspend, what we call government propaganda, right? So in the mañaneras, we have government propaganda, and López Obrador has continued with these press conferences. And what the electoral authorities have told him is you cannot do that because you're violating the Constitution. The other thing that López Obrador has done is that he has been criticizing the opposition parties, right? In particular, the fact that PRI, PAN, and PRD, which were, let me say, the traditional political parties in Mexico after 1997, they made a coalition, and so they are running they're running together in most of the elections. And López Obrador has criticized a lot of that. That is exactly what President Fox did in 2006, right, when he was criticizing López Obrador. So again, the president is also violating the law. And on the other hand, what has happened in the side of his political party, Morena, is that I guess they are really the least consolidated political party in institutional terms. So I think it has been really hard for them to start working as a political party and not just a political movement, right? So they have been pretty negligent in terms of presenting and complying with all the election laws. So the paradox is that López Obrador has been very vocal in terms of criticizing the electoral authority. And his argument is basically that these authorities were designated, by the past administrations, and that today they are just taking these decisions in order to affect López Obrador, Morena, and the fourth transformation. I think, honestly, from a legal point of view, what the authorities have been doing in general terms is just applying what the law is there. And of course, again, we can discuss whether or not these are good or bad rules. I think in many democracies, it will be what? The president cannot say anything, even though he's an elected official. That's a Mexican constitution. That's a Mexican law, but that's what we have, and we cannot expect the authorities not to apply the law, Enrique, I think.
Yeah. So you mentioned something about the electoral authorities being designated by parties, or at least that's what the president now would say. And I think this is a critique that he has long had about the electoral institutions. But as you said, this reforms that he and his sympathizers wanted, and he himself won the presidential election in 2018, one that was overseen by the National Electoral Institute. Do you think that the electoral organs, whether it's the National Electoral Institute, the Federal Electoral Tribunal, or local electoral institutes, are captured by political parties? And if so, how does this happen, and by whom are they captured?
I think, I would say two things. Like, first and foremost, I think any electoral authority, not only in Mexico, but all over the world, I mean, it's always on the risk of being captured by the political parties, right? Because usually those who make the appointments to these authorities are political parties, right? Or legislators that are elected through a political party. And at the same time, they are the regulators of political parties, right? So you really have all the incentives, right? Like, I mean, that as it happens in other kind of energies, and that is true. I think that what really matters in the Mexican context is that the rules for appointing different electoral authorities are very different, right? So the rules that govern the election or the designation of the National Electoral Institute, I think that have worked relatively well. First and foremost, because the first body that participates in this process, it's not a partisan authority, right? So it is a technical committee. That's the name that the Constitution uses. Some members are appointed, of course, by the Chamber of Deputies, and you also have members that are designated by other independent authorities, that the National Commission of Human Rights and also the National Institute for Transparency. A very thing has happened in the election court. On the one hand, the process, I think it's not that good, because we do have the participation of a non-partisan institution which is the Supreme Court, and I guess the Supreme Court has the power to select candidates that will have a minimum of independence and technical competence. And then you go to the Senate, and then in the Senate you need 2/3 to appoint them. The thing is that in practice, what has happened is that the Supreme Court has been playing the political game of the appointments, and what they have basically sought is to have at least 2 or 3 election judges that come from the judiciary, right? What would you say they are from the House in Mexico? And I think that in 2016 we have a complete renovation of the higher chamber. At that time, there were 7 spaces, or there were 7 seats in the higher chamber. And what the law said at that time is that in order to have partial renovations and not just like completely and full renovations, that during that year, 3 judges were going to be designated for a period of 9 years. 2 judges were going to be designated for a period of 6 years, and another 2 judges were going to be designated for a period of 3 years. During the negotiations in the Senate, the 3 major parties, the PRI, the PAN, and the PRD, decided that they were going first to appoint the 7 judges for those periods, 3, 6, and 9 years. But later they decided to increase or to extend the period of 4 judges. And I guess like that was an obvious attempt from the PRI, from the PAN, and from the PRD, just to extend their influence in the designation of the court. If they had respected what the law said in 2019, we would have a renovation of 2 seats, right, in the election court, and Morena would have participated, right? But I think political parties at that time, what they basically decided was like, oh, we're gonna, let me put it this way, we're gonna take some years or some judges that would have been elected by Morena, and then we're going to extend the period of those judges that we are electing. And so Morena and a part of the PR, they were really, really, really angry at that moment, and they were, of course, completely right. What happened in the election court is that between their appointment in 2016 and the 2018 elections, they took a lot of decisions that were, let me say, put it this way, that were not legally sound, right? I mean, if you read the opinions, I mean, they're not convincing. They are not applying the law. And at the same time, those were decisions that were favoring PRI and PAN fundamentally, right? And for example, in 2017, PRI, the PRI's candidate in Coahuila, a state in the north of Mexico, clearly spent more than the limit in his campaign. The INE said, this candidate has violated the law, and that opened the possibility of nullifying the election, right? And we have a lot of resolutions from the election court, which basically just tried with pretty bad legal arguments to say like, oh, no, he didn't violate the law. We really don't know if he did or not. So the election was not nullified, right? After 2018, when López Obrador wins with 50% of the popular vote in the presidential election, and when he basically controlled both chambers, the Senate and the lower chamber with Morena and his allies, it's like the court understood that it had to change its position, right? So if the court before was playing in favor of PRI and PAN, now after 2018, the court began to play in favor of Morena. So for example, there was like I don't know how to say it, but perhaps one of the greatest scandals in terms of campaign finance in 2017 and 18. But what the President López Obrador basically did is what he created a parallel system to get money in political campaigns through a trust fund. Por los demás, it was his name. It was called the Morena Gate. And they basically used something as 80 million pesos, right, on that trust fund. And we don't really know where that money ended up. They said that it was going to be used to help people who were affected by the earthquake that happened in Mexico that year, but we really don't know. And what we do know is that money was given to people who were affiliated and worked for Morena, right? So the National Electoral Institute sanctioned Morena with a really high fine. It was something as 200 million pesos. And the election court said that the process was they did not respect, due process, and just completely eliminated that fine, right? I would say that in general terms, the designation process has been way better at INE. And if we can talk today about an institution that is captured by political parties, I would say it's the election court, which is complicated because the final word is always on the courts, right? So the administrative body can take a lot of decisions, can apply the Constitution and the law, but in the end, anything can be challenged in court. And if the last word is in the election courts, and those are precisely the institutions that have been captured by political parties, or at least that in more than one occasion decide more with a political rationale that with legal arguments, that's something complicated. So I would say that perhaps the greatest challenge in terms of these institutions for the 2021 election is precisely to see whether or not the courts will apply the Constitution or the law, or whether they will just basically try to accommodate political interests, right? So I think, hopefully it won't happen, but I think it's possible that we will see a lot of legal challenges after this these elections. I mean, the number of challenges that are presented in every election in Mexico, it's completely, crazy and out of proportion. And if you add up the fact that you have a court that's not really doing its job, then I think it can be a really messy election after the election, paradoxically, right?
Yeah, that was exactly the question I was about to ask you. But so Anne, let me ask you a different question. And this very direct question, is democracy in jeopardy? For some people, this question may sound too alarmist. Well, for others, they have been saying this for years, even like I would say from 2006 when AMLO first ran for president, right? But the way that you are kind of telling this story is that the Electoral Tribunal has sided with politics, not just now, but has done it before. And so to what extent do you think that democracy in Mexico may be in danger?
I mean, I think that, to be honest, there's a lot of exaggeration out there, right? Like saying like, oh, we're becoming Venezuela or whatever, right? So I would say two things, right? On the one hand, it is true, right? Like, it is not the first time in democracy that electoral authorities are trying to benefit a political party, or at least that it seems that they're benefiting a political party, right? But on the other, I would say like the context is completely different, right? Before, I don't know, perhaps, I know, it's fair to say after 1997, there was never a time in which the president had those majorities in Congress, right? So it is true that we have seen a lot of constitutional reforms in that have modified dramatically electoral authorities. Perhaps the best example is the 2014 election. What it's new is that before 2018, you needed different political parties in order to make these constitutional reforms that change electoral authorities. So that, let me put it this way, that gave you some sort of balance, right? In terms of how the new institution is going to look like, what the rules are going to look like, and most important, who are going to be the members of these bodies, right? In this moment, it's completely different, right? Especially if Morena wins the 2021 election and they get the 2/3 of the lower chamber, they will basically be able to dramatically change the way electoral authorities work, right? And what they have explicitly said is that they want to spend less money, and that IFE is too big, and that we need a less, like a weaker electoral authority. And if we see the whole picture, this thing goes beyond the electoral authorities, right? So never in history we have seen a president that has been attacking constantly the judiciary, right? So all the autonomous institutions in Mexico, not only the INE, but also the courts, and also the Transparency Institute, and all the agencies that regulate, telecommunications and that regulate economic affairs, have been under constant attack of the president, right? So I would say that, yes, I think there's a risk in terms of having a democratic backlash in Mexico. I think that is going to be conditional on the results that Morena and its allies get on the 2021 election. But I think it would be extremely dangerous to disappear INE and to create another institution that is captured or is fundamentally designated by only Morena and his allies. That would be a red flag. Because again, in Mexico, it has been a very long and complicated road to have relatively decent elections, right? We have a lot of problems in terms of, we don't really know where the money comes from in many of the elections, but one thing is for sure, right? Like once people vote, the votes get counted, and they get counted with a good procedure, right? So we really have the certainty of who won all the elections, and that's not a minor thing, right? Changing the composition of the authority, changing the rules by only a political party or a dominant coalition, I think that can fundamentally change that historical achievement of Mexican democracy. So I wouldn't say like, oh, we're going to be Venezuela in 2 years, but there are definitely some signs that should be really, really clear warnings for all of us.
Javier Martín Reyes, professor in the Department of Legal Studies at Centro de Investigación y Ciencias Económicas. Thank you so much for this conversation and for answering these questions.
No, it was a pleasure, Enrique. I'm happy to be here talking with you.
That was Javier Martín Reyes. That is it for this episode. Thank you for listening to the Judy Lay Allen Mexico Center podcast. Thanks to Lisa Huaqueta, our program manager, and to Tony Payan, the director of the Center for the United States and Mexico at Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy. Special thanks to Judy Lay Allen for her generous support of the work we do at the center. You can visit our website at bakerinstitute.org/Mexico, where you can find our latest publications. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the guests and the host and do not necessarily reflect those of the center. If you have any comments or suggestions, you can email us at usmexicocenter@rice.edu. We would love to hear from you. Mexico Centered is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, Radio Public, and Spotify. You can subscribe through your favorite podcast app to receive all of our new episodes directly on your phone. From a fully vaccinated Enrique Quesada, stay safe, get your vaccine if you haven't done so, and I will see you next time.